So welcome everybody to the meeting here, the FUAL meeting, where we are going to listen to a presentation by Jacob Damstra from Urban Roots, who's the lead there, working on community composting. Jacob is one of the directors at Urban Roots. He's a civil litigation dispute resolution lawyer during the daytime at Learners. He is dedicated problem solver and community leader focused on environmental and public interest cases and causes. So Jacob, thanks so much for coming tonight. And I give the floor over to you. If you need to share your screen, go ahead.
Thank you, Gabor. I don't have any sort of planned sort of slide deck presentation or photos. So I intend mostly to speak and mostly just sort of share stories about Urban Roots, the community compost program that we're running, some of the challenges that we've faced and lessons learned through the last year and what we're looking at doing going forward. And then happy to take questions about some of the issues which I'll bring up and pass by and leave for questions, and other questions that folks might have. So as Gabor said, I am a director at Urban Roots. I've been involved from the early days. I wasn't involved in founding the organization, but started volunteering on the farm and bringing my kids out in the early days to help the co-founders. And then in the winter between the first season and the second season was asked to join the board. At the same time, in my day job, as Gabor said, I'm a lawyer practicing at Learners in London, broad civil litigation and dispute resolution practice, which is really growing and focusing on a lot of environmental, municipal, regulatory, and other sort of public law, public interest issues. And so there's a good overlap here, especially when we start talking about some of the regulatory challenges there are and hurdles to overcome in relation to a community composting program. So just briefly, for those that don't know or don't have full knowledge, Urban Roots London is a not-for-profit urban farm which is dedicated to revitalizing underused land within the city for the purpose of agriculture to grow high quality, organically grown, biointensively grown produce, and then to distribute that produce on what we call our model of thirds, where right off the top, from every bed that we harvest, 1/3 is donated to community development partners like Crouch Community Resource Center, the London Food Bank, the London Vegan Food Bank, my sister's place, etc. 1/3 is sold at accessible rates, either directly at farm gate sales at our farm, which is at 21 Norland Ave at Hamilton and Highbury, right off the Meadow Lily Bridge area, and or to food-based social enterprises with which we have partnerships and good relationships. And then the final third is sold at market rates for organically grown produce to restaurant partners or members of the community that elect to pay a full rate in order to support the other two streams distributing that produce. So the farm itself has been growing steadily since 2017. We've had 4 growing seasons and seen very significant year-over-year growth, both in terms of what we're able to do because we're tending to the soil, we're investing in soil health, in the microbiology, using low intervention, low till practices, and preserving soil substructure, and investing in soil health year over year. So we're able to grow more per area every year, and we're also expanding the growing area on that site. Last year, we started to think about how we could continue to improve on and develop the mission that we had set out, which is revitalizing underused land, and to think about food production as the complete life cycle of food, and how we could contribute to developing that in our city. As probably everybody here and everybody listening knows, the City of London did not and still does not have a green bin organics waste program. So, kitchen scraps go into the garbage for the most part, unless people are backyard composting or doing something else with it. I'm not sure what they would be doing, but for the most part, it's not an option, and either people don't know how to compost, they have some barrier or resistance to it because of thinking that it's going to be smelly or messy or time consuming. They don't have space. So there are lots of reasons why people choose not to compost. And the fact that we didn't have a green bin program meant that for the majority of people, those easily diverted and very useful kitchen scraps go to landfill, contribute to the amounts that we have in our landfill, the carbon and methane emissions from landfill, and it's throwing away a very valuable resource, which could be processed and turned into compost and applied to the soil in which we grow for better yields in the future. So we looked at that. We looked at the farm being in a position where we're importing compost, we're buying it and bringing it in. And those two problems naturally solve each other. So we proposed to set up a composting program where we would compost our own vegetable waste, the cutoffs, the materials that would have been discarded at the end of the season, which we were going to do anyways. And we started doing that, and very quickly realized that for an operation of our size, the amounts that we can produce with just those implements is not anywhere near sufficient to sustain a whole farm. And realized also that 20 to 25% of most landfills in North America are food waste and food scraps, and thought about how we could divert that. So through the London Environmental Network's Environmental Action Incubator, we proposed to launch this program, and we did some due diligence to make sure we would be able to do it, which I'm going to speak about. And we're accepted into that program, got a little bit of seed funding from Len to launch the program, which in effect invites members of the community to save their food scraps or yard waste and bring them to the farm. During the growing season, we have set days and times, and during the off season, so currently we just have a drop-off location, which is collected about once a week and then put into our compost bins for processing. And we ask the folks who are currently coming to the farm as customers or as volunteers to think about saving their food scraps, bringing them to us. We have weighed and tracked the types of implements, the sort of household demographics of who's participating in the program, the weight of the materials that are being contributed. And so we know, who's bringing, what they're bringing, and how much they're bringing week over week and over the course of the whole season last year. And then on site, we have a very simple setup right now. We are developing for this year a more advanced and less labor-intensive composting system, but I'll speak to both. So the first, actually, let me just finish the sort of story behind the idea. And the idea is folks who are coming to the farm anyways to volunteer their time to pick up their produce on a farm gate sales night. They are able to bring their kitchen scraps, drop them off, pick up food to bring home, prepare healthy, locally grown produce for their families and for themselves, save the scraps and bring it back the next week when they pick up their next batch. So it's very much a circular system where it's a continuous cycle, the life cycle of food. As the scraps then are processed into compost, the compost is applied to the field grows the food is harvested and sold, and the cycle repeats itself. So it is, just a really natural and beautiful circular system, which we're seeing, and we've started to see a lot of uptake in that program, with people coming back week after week, excited to be educated on the farm about what types of things can be composted, what not to include, how the process works, and to get their hands dirty and actually see how it works. And we've had a number of people tell us that they started and they realized how simple it was, and actually started composting at home, which means they're not bringing it to us, but it's a great thing because the goal is diversion of waste. But of course, for those who can't do it on their own for whatever their various reasons, it's excellent to have an option, especially when it's connected to an immediate implementation on a farm like ours, which is then going to be able to grow more food to distribute in the community. So practically, how we do it, a very simple hedgerow system with an agricultural ground sheet, like a silage tarp, covering a hedgerow pile. It's, the contributions are weighed and measured and added to the pile, turned in. I was able to source a very large tote of clean hardwood sawdust to add as a carbon material in between layers of the kitchen scraps so that it doesn't get too wet or slimy or stinky. And it's turned every so often to oxygenate the pile and continue breaking it down and processing it. We don't add anything else. There's no compost starter. There's no bacteria that we add because of the way that it's done. It's right on the ground. The earthworms and microorganisms are able to access it directly from the ground and break down those contributions into compost. So that's what we have done over the course of last year. Just from community contributions, we gathered somewhere between 2,500 and 3,000 pounds of food waste scraps. We have a couple of restaurant partners who are contributing a good source of coffee grounds, spent coffee grounds, and we're able to mix that in as well. So that's the kind of what happened last year. This year, we are going to move to a more automatic aeration system with perforated PVC pipes through concrete block collection boxes. So the air through the perforated PVC pipes will automatically aerate the compost, allowing it to break down faster and require less labor. So we're able to process more with less time. And as a result, we're able to spread our net more broadly and invite more contributions. What we're looking at doing this year is establishing some partnerships for different community contribution points, drop-off locations, where our partners at those locations will collect compost contributions from folks who are more local to them, and then on a weekly basis, bring it to the farm and drop it off for processing. I'll talk about why this becomes a little bit tricky from a regulatory standpoint in a minute, but the idea behind having these different distributed collection locations is some people aren't able to access or have some resistance to accessing the community composting program at the farm at our location. They don't have a vehicle. They don't have a way to transport their materials all the way to the farm. They wouldn't otherwise be coming to the farm, or they just might be more prone to attend at another site and drop off their compost there. So for example, at Reimagine Co.'s zero waste grocery store that they've just opened up this past fall, we're working with the founders there to develop a partnership to do exactly this. So any grocery waste that they might not be able to sell before it goes past the point of being able to consume, they'll collect and bring to us. And they're also going to offer a collection point, so their customers who are there to shop at a zero waste, zero and a package free grocery store can bring back their kitchen scraps there, as opposed to coming all the way to the farm. And the good folks at Reimagine Co. will be able to then come and drop off their collection to us to process. We can then grow and harvest and supply our produce to their shelves. So it's really, again, that completed life cycle of food. And we're looking at establishing a couple of different partnerships and locations where we can do this. We've had some preliminary conversations with folks who live in multi-unit residential buildings, apartment buildings and the like, about having a collection point for the residents of those buildings to then be delivered to Urban Roots. And that would be great because it helps those facilities to divert waste. And for the most part, the people who are living in apartments are some of the folks who are most limited in their ability to process their own food waste, kitchen scraps, et cetera, into compost. So it's a really natural fit, and we're hoping to be able to pilot a couple of sites this year to do that. So let me talk briefly about the sort of regulatory limitations and restrictions which make this whole thing more difficult than it should be. And I think probably everybody on this call and folks who are interested in community composting would agree that I think Gabor mentioned at the outset of this meeting that it is, or at least should be, the way of the future for a number of the reasons that we talked about, with people being more interested, more aware of both the costs of not doing it and the benefits and ease of doing it, but still having some of the roadblocks and limitations that would prevent everybody from doing it individually. There's also, in composting, economies of scale. It takes an awful lot of an individual household to compost to create any meaningful amount of usable compost. And it does take some skill to do. If you're just putting it in a pile and leaving it, you're not going to end up with a good product. So there is a benefit to having a centralized, community collection site, whether it's at Urban Roots or a community garden or other plots. The issue currently is that under the Environmental Protection Act, the Ministry of Environment, Climate and Parks has jurisdiction to regulate food waste, and there are specific regulations on waste management which limit the ability of certain sites to collect waste product and process it into compost. This is problematic for most sites because unless you're zoned agricultural or industrial, you're actually not allowed to collect and process for sale or use other than for your own purposes these types of materials. Because Urban Roots location is zoned open space 1, a special use for agricultural purpose, and permitting us to do urban agriculture for sale, we are able to use organic materials produced on site into compost as long as they're used on site. and they also have to be processed into a compost material, and they can't just be scattered on the fields, which you wouldn't do anyways. But we're also not allowed, even with that designation and exception, to go out and collect contribution. We're not allowed to pay for contributions of these types of materials, and we're not allowed to accept payment to collect contribution of these types of materials. So it all operates on a volunteer basis for people who are interested in participating, bringing their contributions on a voluntary basis, and without Urban Roots board or volunteers or staff going out and collecting. So we can't go door to door in our own neighborhood and pick up people's kitchen scraps and bring them back to the farm. And we can't go to a restaurant partner when we're delivering a harvest order to their restaurant to bring back their compost to the farm because of the ministry's regulations. As a result, it's quite limited in terms of how this can grow. I think that it's ripe for policy change. And I know that the City of London's Urban Agriculture Steering Committee is aware of this issue and sort of exploring how to go about it. And I'm certainly in constant communication with Jay Stanford at the city in the solid waste management department and all of the other hats that he wears about how to navigate these restrictions. But I do need to raise that because I know there's a lot of interest in having community compost projects in other locations, and there may be some regulatory limitations on the ability to do that. There are ways to apply for exemptions to the ministry to clear projects in advance. But when I did that in advance of launching Urban Roots program, working with the provincial officers at the ministry who are in this jurisdiction, I mean, this is an unknown entity for them because people aren't doing this. So it doesn't fit squarely within any of the regulatory limitations that they're used to. And we needed to, think creatively about where this might fit into certain exceptions. And fortunately, as I said, because of the zoning, and because of Urban Roots operation as an agricultural nonprofit, we're able to do what we're doing, but there may be limitations on doing it further without some sort of policy change or exemption. So maybe I'll leave it there for now in terms of the presentation. I can close by saying that we are running our composting program again this year from now until the beginning or middle of April, when we get back out on the farm full time. Folks can drop off any compost contributions that they want to make. There's a well signed bin that it can be dropped off at the gate at 21 Norland Ave at the farm. And then once we start up again, there'll be more announcements about how and when to contribute. And that's where I'll leave it. So thanks for your time and your attention, and I'm happy to open it up and have a conversation.
Thanks so much, Jacob. That was really great, very comprehensive. You've given us lots of food for thought. I mean, compost for thought. So I had to put that in. Everyone, so do we have some questions for Jacob? I'm going to stop recording as we discussed.